Listen carefully, because this is not just a story about a fire. It's about what the fire revealed and what it refused to burn. In 1866, Bahia was a land of contradictions. Golden sugar fields stretching into horizon, worked by hands still bound in chains. Even though the world had already begun to speak of freedom, the empire in Rio pretended slavery was fading. But here, in the Bahian hinterlands, the masters still ruled like kings, and the houses of the enslaved still echoed with the sound of iron. The story I'm about to tell was whispered first as gossip, then as a warning, and finally as a curse. It began with a wedding, a grand one that was meant to symbolize purity, wealth, and divine blessing. But behind the polished silver, the silk dresses, and the priest's trembling Latin prayers, something ancient and angry was watching. They said it happened at the Casa Grande de São Domingos, a white mansion sitting high above the Sugar Valley, its windows facing the sea, its heart built on the bones of 100 forgotten men. The owner, Colonel Ambrosio de Sá, was one of the richest men in the province, a man who believed gold could silence the dead. He was marrying off his only daughter, Isabel, 19, pale, fragile, raised like a flower that never felt the sun. Her fiancé, a Portuguese merchant twice her age, came from Lisbon with promises of wealth and a secret contract that bound more than just two souls. They said the enslaved people prepared the feast for 7 days, their sweat and blood mixed into the food, their eyes lowered as they carried trays of wine and sugar. They knew something the guests did not. They knew that under the floorboards of that great house lay the graves of those who had once tried to escape, buried not by faith, but by silence. And among the enslaved servants, there was one who refused to be silent. Her name was Salome, an old woman, small, almost invisible, but with a gaze that seemed to pierce through walls. She had seen too many weddings, too many holy unions sealed with unholy blood. On the morning of the ceremony, she was seen standing by the well, pouring salt into the water. When the overseer shouted at her, she said, "The salt will keep the fire from rising too soon." No one understood what she meant, but that night, everyone would. The celebration began under heavy skies. Thunder rolled somewhere far beyond plantations. Inside, violins played European waltzes, while outside the air was thick, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Witnesses later said that during the priest's blessing, a black moth landed on the bride's veil. She tried to brush it off, but it clung there, trembling, until the last word of the prayer. The guests laughed nervously. Colonel Ambrosio forced a smile, and the old woman, Salome, whispered, "Even the dead came to bless this union." By midnight, the laughter had turned to murmurs, the wine had turned sour, and somewhere behind the walls of the kitchen, a fire began to breathe. But this was not an accident. The truth, like the fire, was waiting to be released. You see, the groom was not who he seemed. His fortune had been built from human flesh, ships that carried more bodies than souls, from the West African coast to the Bahian shores. And Colonel Ambrosio knew. In fact, that was why he chose him. He believed that by joining their bloodlines, he could wash away his sins in gold. But gold cannot wash blood. It only reflects it. When the flames began to crawl up the curtains, no one screamed at first. They thought it was part of the spectacle, the glow of candles too close to the silk, until the air itself began to burn. Within minutes, the great house became an inferno. The chandeliers melted, the glass windows shattered from the heat. People ran, tripping over gowns and chairs, their shadows dancing on walls that would soon collapse. Colonel Ambrosio tried to save his daughter, but the fire moved faster than mercy. He carried her toward the door, but something or someone blocked his way. It was Salome. Her eyes glowed in the reflection of the flames. "You built your house on bones," she said, "and bones remember." Those were her last words. Moments later, the roof fell, and the Casa Grande de São Domingos became nothing more than a pillar of smoke, rising into the tropical night. In the days that followed, the authorities came. They found the colonel's body fused with molten gold, coins stuck to his hands and face, as if the fire had tried to brand him with his own greed. They found no trace of the bride. Some said she ran into the woods. Others said she burned with her father. But the old ones whispered something else, that she was taken by the spirits her family had denied, the same spirits that once lived in chains beneath their feet. Years later, travelers passing by the ruins claimed they could still hear the sound of a woman crying and the faint clinking of coins in the ashes. And that's how Bahia remembers that wedding, not as a celebration, but as a warning. Because every house built on pain will, one day, be visited by fire. History likes to hide behind dates and names, but sometimes it reveals itself in the smell of smoke, reminding us that justice, even when delayed, always finds a way to breathe. The ruins of that house still stand, or so they say. If you walk through the Sugar Valley at dusk, you can still see its outline against the dying light, a skeleton of stone, silent but not asleep. But to understand how it all began, we must return to the night before the wedding, when the house was still alive, and ignorance still dressed itself as glory. The guests began to arrive 3 days early. Carriages rolled through the muddy roads, their wheels splashing the red earth that once drank the blood of the enslaved. Inside those carriages came the colonial elite, planters, judges, priests, their wives covered in perfume strong enough to hide the stench of the fields. They came not to honor love, but to witness power, a union that would secure land, status, and perhaps a little more gold. In Bahia, 1866, people spoke of abolition as if it were a rumor carried by the wind, something that could be ignored. As long as the plantations kept producing, freedom existed only in speeches, never in the plantation silence. And within that silence, the enslaved people prepared to feast. Salome oversaw everything. She knew which herbs to mix into the food, which candles to light for protection, and which songs to hum quietly, so the ancestors could hear. To her, this wedding wasn't just a party. It was a storm waiting to break. She could feel it in the tremor of the earth, in the way dogs barked at nothing, in the sudden flight of blackbirds that circled above the sugar fields at dusk. The bride, Isabel, spent the last night before her marriage in a room that smelled of jasmine and fear. She sat by the window, watching lightning split the horizon. She didn't love the man she was to marry. She barely knew him. He was old, impatient, and smelled faintly of the sea, the smell of ships that had carried unspeakable cargo. Her only comfort came from her nurse, a woman named Rosa, who had raised her since birth. Rosa was a quiet soul, one who never spoke of her own pain, but whose eyes told stories older than the house itself. That night, she brushed Isabel's hair and whispered in a voice that trembled with memory, "Not all vows are made before God, my child. Some are made beneath the ground." When Rosa left, Isabel tried to pray, but the words felt heavy, as if every line of the prayer was being weighed by unseen eyes. And somewhere in the lower quarters, Salome began to sing, a slow, mournful tune in a language the masters called pagan. The song rose through the floorboards, soft as smoke, filling the house with something older than faith. The morning of the wedding dawned red. The sun climbed over the hills like a wound reopening. Church bells rang across the valley, their sound swallowed by the humid air. Servants ran everywhere, polishing silver, carrying baskets of flowers, trying to make the house forget the smell of burned sugar from the fields. When the priest arrived, his cassock was already soaked in sweat. He looked at the sky and murmured that storms always followed weddings held under red suns. The colonel laughed it off, but his laughter was brittle. He had slept poorly, troubled by dreams of men without faces, dragging chains across his floor. At noon, the guests filled the great hall. The music began, violins trembling under the weight of heat and tension. Isabel appeared at the top of the staircase, dressed in lace imported from Europe, pale as marble, her hands shaking inside white gloves. The crowd gasped, as if beauty could erase the crimes beneath it. And then the groom entered, Don Alvaro, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He walked with the confidence of those who believed they owned everything they touched. When he looked at Isabel, it wasn't with affection, but with possession. Even the priest hesitated before beginning the blessing. Outside, thunder rumbled again. The servants froze. Salome, standing by the kitchen door, lifted her head as if listening to something far away. And then she saw it, a trail of black ants crawling across the floor, marching toward the altar. She whispered under her breath, "The earth remembers. It comes to collect." The ceremony dragged on. The priest's Latin words echoed against the high ceiling, and the guests fanned themselves, pretending not to notice the sudden chill in the air. When the couple exchanged rings, a drop of blood appeared on Isabel's finger. No one knew how it happened, but Salome saw it, and she smiled softly as if the ancestors had answered. That night, the feast began. Tables heavy with food, wine flowing like a second river, music swelling until the windows shook. The colonel toasted his fortune, and the guests cheered, drunk on sugar, power, and denial. But in the shadows of courtyard, Salome lit a single candle and placed it inside a bowl of salt water. She prayed in a whisper, for every child lost to this house, for every back that carried its glory. Let no joy here last untested. The candle flickered, once, twice, then the flame stood still. Outside, lightning struck a palm tree, splitting it in two. The music faltered, the dogs began to howl, and a strange silence fell over the great house, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The wedding of shadows had begun. In the archives, there is no record curses, no mention of songs sung beneath the floorboards. But history has always been written by those who fear what cannot be measured. And in Bahia, people say truth doesn't hide in books. It hides in the smoke. The music lasted longer than the daylight. By the time the sun finally sank behind the sugarcane, the great house glowed like a lantern above the valley, every window alive with candlelight, every corridor filled with voices that did not yet know they were speaking their last words. Outside, the sky darkened into a heavy purple. Thunder kept its distance, rumbling like a warning that no one cared to hear. Inside, the air was thick with heat, perfume, and the sweet edge of spilled wine. Laughter rose and fell in waves, covering, for a few hours, the silence of the slave quarters below. If you could stand just for a moment in the doorway that separated the hall of the masters from the service passage of the enslaved, you would see two worlds pressed against each other, never allowed to touch. On one side, crystal glasses, lace gloves, waltzes, words like honor, family, and prosperity. On the other side, bare feet, calloused hands, sweat-soaked shirts, and a quiet understanding that no joy in that house came without a price someone else had to pay. The bride, Isabel, sat beside her new husband, at the head of the long table. From a distance, she looked like a painting, still, perfect, framed in gold. But up close, you would have seen how tightly she held the edge of her chair, how her eyes kept drifting toward the windows, as if measuring the distance between her and the night. Don Alvaro drank eagerly. His laughter grew louder with every toast, his gaze drifting from guest to guest, like a merchant evaluating cargo. He made a joke about storms and superstition, about African fears and backward beliefs. The men around him laughed along. The women smiled, their eyes darting away, as though the very air might be listening. At the far end of the hall, Colonel Ambrosio raised his glass and spoke of lineage, of futures already decided, of children yet unborn who would inherit land and God's blessing. He did not speak of the men and women who had died cutting his cane and building his walls in his version of the future. Their names did not exist. In the kitchen, the heat was worse. Ovens roared, pots boiled, and the smell of roasted meat mixed with charcoal and rum. Dozens of enslaved cooks and servants moved in a rhythm they had never chosen, passing dishes, refilling trays, Stepping aside when the overseer walked in, Salome stood by the open hearth, her face lit by the restless glow of the flames. She had seen many nights like this, nights when the masters celebrated an alliance, a harvest, a birth. The pattern was always the same. Excess above, exhaustion below. But tonight felt different. The fire in the hearth did not look tame. It licked at the iron pot as if testing its chains, flaring when no draft passed, shrinking when someone drew near. Salome whispered a line of a prayer her grandmother had taught her in a land across the ocean that no map in that house acknowledged. She sprinkled a pinch of salt into the fire. The flames crackled, then steadied. "Are you talking to the fire again?" Rosa's voice came from behind her. Rosa, the nurse who had raised Isabel, stepped into the light with a bowl of fruit in her hands. There was tiredness in her shoulders, but something sharper in her eyes. "I'm talking to whoever is listening." Salome answered softly, "Because I know the ones who built this house are still waiting to be heard." Rosa glanced toward the hall. The music surged again, a waltz from Vienna played by men who had never seen Vienna in their lives. "They won't listen," Rosa said, "not until something breaks." Salome looked back at the fire, then something will break. Later that night, when the main course had been served, and the guests had begun to drift between the hall and the verandas, Isabel slipped away. She walked down a dim corridor, the lace of her dress brushing the dusty floor. Her steps were silent, not because she had learned to be quiet, but because a lifetime in that house had taught her that the walls always listened. She found Rosa alone in a small side room, folding linens that would never be clean enough for the eyes that judged them. "Rosa," Isabel whispered, "do you ever feel like the house is watching?" Rosa paused, her hand still on the fabric. "That's because it is," she answered calmly. "Not the walls, the things buried underneath." Isabel hesitated, her carefully trained composure cracking. "Before the wedding," she said, "I went into my father's office. I shouldn't have, but I saw the papers. Names, numbers. They weren't from the plantation. They were from ships." Her voice almost broke on that last word. "Men bought and sold. From ports I've only heard whispered about. And the groom, his name was on the contracts." Rosa met her gaze slowly, as if looking at a child who had just discovered that monsters were real and had familiar faces. "My father said it was business," Isabel continued, a tremor in her voice. "He said it was God's will. He said it was already done long before I was born, that nothing I feel can change what feeds this house." Rosa's throat tightened, but her voice remained steady. "There is a difference," she said quietly, "between being born in a house of guilt and choosing to keep its doors locked." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "What if I don't want this?" She whispered, "This marriage, this name, this life built on chains I never forged." Rosa placed a hand on her shoulder, a forbidden gesture in the eyes of the masters, but one she had earned long ago, when Isabel had been small enough to fit in her arms. "Then listen," Rosa said, "listen to what the night is saying, because sometimes, when those up there refuse to change, something else decides for them." A crash echoed from the hall, a glass breaking, followed by laughter. The moment shattered. Isabel wiped her eyes and returned to the party, to her role, to the mask. Soon after, the first argument of the night began. Some witnesses would later say it started between Don Alvaro and a guest over money lost at cards. Others would claim they saw the groom grab Isabel's wrist too tightly, pulling her aside with a fury that didn't match the smile on his face. We don't have a perfect record. The archives do not document raised voices, shaken hands, the look of a woman realizing she has been traded like property. But the people who worked in the shadows remember. Their testimony lives in whispers, not ink. What we know is this: at some point, Don Alvaro disappeared from the hall and stormed toward the back of the house, toward the storage room where crates of rum and oil were kept. Around the same time, one of the kitchen boys dropped an oil lamp. He swears, in the version told years later, that he felt something push his arm. When no one was there, the lamp hit the floor, glass shattered, oil bled into dry wood. The flame that crawled out was small, almost embarrassed, a lick of light no bigger than a candle. It could have died there, stamped out by a quick hand, a wet cloth, a single moment of attention. But no one saw it. The boy was slapped and sent away. The overseer cursed and left, believing the danger was over. The music, once again, drowned out the warning. In the storage room, Don Alvaro paced like a trapped animal. He poured himself more rum with shaking hands, muttering about money owed, about deals made, about a wife who would learn her place. The flame reached a stack of cloth. The cloth fed it. The wood beside it welcomed it. The room filled with a quiet, growing light that no one had invited, but no one could now ignore. By the time a servant smelled smoke, it was already too late. The first shout came from the back corridor. Then a second, the music stuttered, violins squealing to a stop. A guest laughed nervously, thinking it was part of some crude joke. Then the doors opened, and the smoke flowed in. It moved low at first, hugging the ground, curling around table legs, and the hems of dresses. Children coughed. Someone called for more air. Someone else shouted for the windows to be opened. The great house responded, with a sound none of them would ever forget, the groan of beams surrendering to heat. The fire burst into the hall, with a roar that drowned out every human voice. Curtains ignited. The ceiling flowers, painted by an artist from Europe, disappeared behind black scars. The chandeliers began to drip molten wax and metal, like tears from a blind god. Panic broke whatever order the masters had tried to impose. The careful seating arrangement shattered as people knocked over chairs, trampled fallen glasses, pushed one another toward the doors. Those doors, however, had been built more to keep people out than to let them out. In the chaos, we see clearly who was expected to survive and who was not. The colonel shouted for his daughter and for the strong box where he kept his gold. With the same breath, he ordered the servants to save the documents, the ledgers, the proof of everything he owned. He did not call out the names of those who had cooked his meals and raised his child. In the corridors, enslaved men and women picked up children who were not their own, covered their faces with cloth, pushed them toward any exit they could find. Some doors opened easily, the ones meant for guests. Other doors did not open at all, the ones that kept the enslaved locked at night. More than one person died, with their hands on iron that had never been meant to move. And in the midst of the inferno, Salome walked as if she could see, a path no one else did. She moved through the smoke, her old lungs burning, her eyes fixed on something beyond the collapsing beams. She found Isabel in the center of the hall, frozen, watching the flames crawl up the walls, as though reading a truth, finally written in a language she could not deny. "Come," Salome said, her voice somehow steady. "We must go." Isabel turned to her, tears cutting clean tracks down her ash-streaked cheeks. "Did we deserve this?" she asked, not in the way the master spoke of deserving punishment, but in the way his soul questions its place in a world built on wounds. Salome did not answer directly. She had no comfort to offer, only honesty. "The house deserves what the house is owed," she said, "and the ground is collecting." Flames leapt between them like a living thing. Someone screamed from the staircase. A section of the balcony gave way, sending wood and bodies crashing below. Rose appeared from the smoke, coughing, eyes wild. She grabbed Isabel's arm, pulling her toward an open side door. "Don't look back," Rosa shouted. "Run." For a moment, Isabel obeyed. She took 3 steps toward the door, toward the night, toward whatever life might exist, beyond the boundaries of that burning estate. Then she stopped. Behind her, she heard another sound. Not fire, not glass, not the call of her father. She heard the wail, of the people below, those still trapped in storage rooms, in servant quarters, behind locked doors. And she understood in that instant that even if she escaped, her survival would taste of ashes. What happened next, no single account can agree on. Some say Isabel tore herself free and ran back into the hall, vanishing into the blaze. Others claim they saw her on the balcony, hair loose, dress aflame, before she disappeared in a shower of sparks. And there is another version, told only in certain circles, that Rosa managed to pull her outside, that Isabel fell on the grass, breathing smoke and sobs, and that when the first light of dawn came, her footprints led away from the ruins, toward the dense, waiting forest. The archives are silent on this point. They list casualties in numbers, not stories. They reduce lives to tallies. What cannot be denied is this. By the time the sun rose, the great house of São Domingos was a skeleton of stone and charred beams. The air stank of wet ash and burned sugar. The valley woke to a new silence, one that no music could ever fill again. Among the ruins, they found the body of Colonel Ambrosio, near what remained of his office. Melted coins fused into his hands, as if the gold he trusted had finally decided to cling to him, in death as tightly as he had clung to it in life. The body of Don Alvaro was found in the storage room, where the fire had first become a beast. His face was unrecognizable, but in the ashes around him, they later discovered pieces of ledger paper. The ink boiled away, the deals erased by heat. No court could have ordered. As for Salome, some say she died inside, praying with her back to the flames. Others insist she was seen at dawn, standing among the smoke, unburned, whispering to the ground. Rosa survived. We know this because years later, she would be the one to tell this story to anyone who cared to listen, not as a legend, but as a testimony. That night, before the authorities arrived, and the official reports were written, word had already spread through the valley. The master's wedding had turned into a funeral, and the house that had been built on chains had finally met its fire. History, when written by power, called it an accident. The people who lived beneath that power called it something else. They called it reckoning. And in Bahia, that word carries more weight than any legal document. Now, we move from the flames themselves to what came after, to the trials, the rumors, the birth of a legend that turned one night of fire into a permanent stain on the land. Part 4, the aftermath and the curse. Morning came gray and windless. The valley, once loud with work songs and bells, lay under a shroud of ash so fine. It turned the cane fields the color of bone. The smell of smoke clung to everything, clothes, skin, even prayer. Bahia had awakened to its own reflection, and it did not like what it saw. The provincial police arrived before noon. They came on horseback, their uniforms still damp from the rain that had begun. As the flames died out, they spoke little to the survivors. Their task was simple: write, measure, classify, and forget. The official report would later describe the tragedy as a domestic accident aggravated by poor maintenance of storage materials. No mention of locked doors. No mention of bodies found in the servant quarters, with chains still around their ankles. No mention of a woman named Salome, or a song that had risen above the fire. History, once again, tried to close its mouth, but the valley refused to stay quiet. By evening, rumors had begun to spread faster than the smoke. They said the colonel had been cursed by his own greed. They said the bride had vanished into the forest, her white dress glowing between the trees like a ghost skin. They said the fire was not born of oil or negligence, but of justice. Justice spoken in a language older than Portuguese. When the ashes cooled, people came to look. Peasants, freedmen, children from nearby villages. They walked among the ruins with the caution of those entering a church that might still be alive. They picked up coins warped by heat, pieces of glass that caught the light like small suns. Some crossed themselves. Others whispered thanks. Rosa was among them. Her face was burned, her hands blistered, but she moved carefully, searching. She found what she was looking for, a small wooden comb that had belonged to Isabel since childhood. It was blackened but whole. Rosa held it to her chest and whispered, "May you have found a place without masters." For weeks, she remained near the ruins. People brought her food, asked for stories. At first, she refused to speak. Then one night, sitting beside the cold stones, she began to talk, not of ghosts or miracles, but of memory. She spoke of how the house had been built on a mass grave of enslaved men, killed during a revolt 30 years earlier. She spoke of how the colonel had ordered lime poured over the bodies so the land would forget. She spoke of the priests who blessed that soil and called it purified. And she ended with words that no historian has ever written down, but which still echo in the oral histories of Bahia. When the ground is asked to forget, it answers with fire. The local authorities wanted closure. They offered Rosa money to leave, a new name, a place in Salvador. She refused. She stayed until the sugarcane grew again and covered what was left of the mansion. She said she would guard it, not for revenge, but to make sure silence never returned completely. In the years that followed, the legend of the cursed wedding spread. Sailors spoke of it in taverns. Missionaries used it as a sermon about pride and punishment, and poets turned it into a ballad sung at festivals. Each version twisted the truth a little, the way wind reshaped smoke. Some said the bride's spirit wandered the hills, carrying a candle that never went out. Others claimed that every 7 years, flames appeared again at the ruins, burning without consuming, as if memory itself refused to die. But behind the myths lay quieter consequences. 3 months after the fire, a regional decree ordered a survey of abandoned properties with possible free labor. Hidden inside the bureaucratic language was a slow awakening, an understanding that the plantation world was starting to crumble. For the first time, the authorities count the enslaved as souls lost, not as capital destroyed. Progress is never born from kindness. Sometimes it crawls out of the ashes. In 1871, when Brazil passed a law to free womb, old people in Bahia said it was the spirit of that house that pushed the empire toward change. They said every decree written in Rio smelled faintly of burned sugar. By then, Rosa was gone. No one knows where she died, only that she was last seen walking north with a bundle of herbs and a small comb in her pocket. The cane cutters who met her on the road remembered her words. Freedom has long legs. You can slow it, but you can't bind it forever. And what of Isabel? The official record lists her among the missing. Yet travelers, decades later, told of a woman who lived by the coast, in a fishing village where the waves erased footprints every night. She was old by then, her hands marked by work, her eyes still pale as smoke. She never gave her real name, but when storms came, she would stand outside and whisper as if to someone still listening. I remember the song of the fire. Whether she was real or imagined no longer matters. Every legend begins with someone who refused to be silent. Today, the valley of Sao Domingos is quiet again. The cane fields sway like an ocean of green. Tourists pass by without stopping. They don't see the stones buried under the soil, or the faint shimmer of glass when the light hits just right. But the people who live nearby still avoid the place at night. They say the air there tastes of salt and smoke. And sometimes when the wind shifts, they hear laughter and weeping tangled together, as if the wedding never ended, only changed its guests. History writes its verdicts in ink. The earth writes its verdicts in flame. And every generation must choose which record it will believe. Morning came gray and windless. The valley, once loud with work songs and bells, lay under a shroud of ash so fine. It turned the cane fields a color of bone. The smell of smoke clung to everything, clothes, skin, even prayer. Bahia had awakened to its own reflection, and it did not like what it saw. The provincial police arrived before noon. They came on horseback, their uniforms still damp from the rain that had begun. As the flames died out, they spoke little to the survivors. Their task was simple: write, measure, classify, and forget. The official report would later describe the tragedy as a domestic accident aggravated by poor maintenance of storage materials. No mention of locked doors. No mention of bodies found in the servant quarters, with chains still around their ankles. No mention of a woman named Salome, or a song that had risen above the fire. History once again tried to close its mouth, but the valley refused to stay quiet. By evening, rumors had begun to spread faster than the smoke. They said the colonel had been cursed by his own greed. They said the bride had vanished into forest, her white dress glowing between the trees like a ghost skin. They said the fire was not born of oil or negligence, but of justice. Justice spoken in a language older than Portuguese. When the ashes cooled, people came to look. Peasants, freedmen, children from nearby villages. They walked among the ruins with the caution of those entering a church that might still be alive. They picked up coins warped by heat, pieces of glass that caught the light like small suns. Some crossed themselves. Others whispered thanks. Rosa was among them. Her face was burned, her hands blistered, but she moved carefully, searching. She found what she was looking for, a small wooden comb that had belonged to Isabel since childhood. It was blackened but whole. Rosa held it to her chest and whispered, "May you have found a place without masters." For weeks, she remained near the ruins. People brought her food, asked for stories. At first, she refused to speak. Then one night, sitting beside the cold stones, she began to talk, not of ghosts or miracles, but of memory. She spoke of how the house had been built on a mass grave of enslaved men, killed during a revolt 30 years earlier. She spoke of how the colonel had ordered lime poured over the bodies so the land would forget. She spoke of the priest who blessed that soil and called it purified. And she ended with words that no historian has ever written down, but which still echo in the oral histories of Bahia. When the ground is asked to forget, it answers with fire. The local authorities wanted closure. They offered Rosa money to leave, a new name, a place in Salvador. She refused. She stayed until the sugarcane grew again and covered what was left of the mansion. She said she would guard it, not for revenge, but to make sure silence never returned completely. In the years that followed, the legend of the cursed wedding spread. Sailors spoke of it in taverns. Missionaries used it as a sermon about pride and punishment, and poets turned it into a ballad sung at festivals. Each version twisted the truth a little, the way wind reshaped smoke. Some said the bride's spirit wandered the hills, carrying a candle that never went out. Others claimed that every 7 years, flames appeared again at the ruins, burning without consuming, as if memory itself refused to die. But behind the myths lay quieter consequences. 3 months after the fire, a regional decree ordered a survey of abandoned properties with possible free labor. Hidden inside the bureaucratic language was a slow awakening, an understanding that the plantation world was starting to crumble. For the first time, the authorities counted the enslaved as souls lost, not as capital destroyed. Progress is never born from kindness. Sometimes it crawls out of the ashes. In 1871, when Brazil passed a law of the free womb, old people in Bahia said it was the spirit of that house that pushed the empire toward change. They said every decree written in Rio smelled faintly of burned sugar. By then, Rosa was gone. No one knows where she died, only that she was last seen walking north with a bundle of herbs and a small comb in her pocket. The cane cutters who met her on the road remembered her words. Freedom has long legs. You can slow it, but you can't bind it forever. And what of Isabel? The official record lists her among the missing, yet travelers, decades later, told of a woman who lived by the coast, in a fishing village where the waves erased footprints every night. She was old by then, her hands marked by work, her eyes still pale as smoke. She never gave her real name, but when storms came, she would stand outside and whisper as if to someone still listening. I remember the song of the fire. Whether she was real or imagined no longer matters. Every legend begins with someone, who refuse to be silent. Today, the Valley of Sao Domingos is quiet again. The cane fields sway like an ocean of green. Tourists pass by without stopping. They don't see the stones buried under the soil, or the faint shimmer of glass when the light hits just right. But the people who live nearby still avoid the place at night. They say the air there tastes of salt and smoke. And sometimes when the wind shifts, they hear laughter and weeping tangled together, as if the wedding never ended, only changed its guests. If you walk through the valley today, nothing tells you a house once stood there. The cane covers everything. Obedient as memory can be when beaten long enough. Only a few stones remain, arranged like teeth in the mouth of time. The locals call the place Campo de Noiva, the bride's field. Children are warned not to play there after dark. Their parents say the earth still remembers the weight of chains. But at dusk, when the wind slips through the cane, the sound it makes is not quite a whisper, not quite a moan. It is something in between, a breathing of history itself. I have stood there. The ground feels warmer than it should. Perhaps that is imagination, or perhaps the heat never truly left. A century and a half later, Bahia has changed its clothes, but not its skin. The mansions crumble, the plantations are tourist stops, yet the same invisible hands still build the world's sweetness. History books mention the fire in a footnote. Accidental conflagration, Sao Domingos Estate, 1866. Nothing more. No names, no grief, no salt in the ink. But oral history, the history that breathes, remembers differently. It says the house was swallowed because it had eaten too much silence. It says the flames did not come to punish, but to speak. For centuries the oppressed were told to pray for light. That night, the light found them and burned its way through marble and lies. Maybe justice does not always arrive with scales and laws. Sometimes it comes wearing smoke. When I read the archives, I find myself searching for Rosa's voice. There is no line that carries her name, no testimony signed with her hand. But there are gaps, spaces where facts end and heartbeat begins. In those spaces, I can almost hear her. Remember what the fire said. Do not let them build the house again. Because they always try. Different walls, different masters, same foundations, the comfort of forgetting. Modern cities are built over sugar fields, and office towers rise where chains once clattered. We call it progress. But the architecture power rarely changes. It only updates its vocabulary. Every society has its Casa Grande, and every Casa Grande waits for its fire. When people ask why stories like this matter, I tell them this. The past is not behind us. It is beneath us. It hums under pavements, under contracts, under hymns. You can walk across it every day and never notice until it cracks open and the heat escapes. Some nights, the valley glows faintly. Fishermen swear they see a pale light moving among the reeds, a woman's figure holding something that flickers like a candle. They call her the Bride of Ashes, but perhaps it is not a ghost. Perhaps it is remembrance itself, wandering because we have not yet given it rest. I have studied enough fires to know this. Flames do not destroy truth. They illuminate it for a moment, then leave us to decide whether to rebuild or to learn. Bahia rebuilt, of course. People always do. The sugar mills resumed. The empire endured a little longer, and the smoke became legend. But legends are embers. They wait for breath. Every generation exhales differently. Some blow to cool, others to reignite. So I end with this reflection, not as a moral imposed, but as an inheritance offered. The fire that consumed the house was not vengeance. It was memory demanding air. And memory, once lit, never dies. The lesson of 1866 is not about how the rich fell, but how truth rises, slowly, painfully, inevitably, through the cracks of denial, because no empire is built strong enough to silence the voices buried beneath it. The fire that burned their gold never died.